It's good to welcome Lana Starkey on this podcast. She currently works as a research fellow at the Institute for Public Affairs, as well as the visiting fellow at the Danube Institute, located here in Budapest, Hungary. We both happen to be in the city right now, although in different locations. Lana, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, yes, not bad. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Very busy. It's exam season, so
Oh, right.
yeah. So tell me about the Institute for Public Affairs. How did you become a member of it?
Well, I must say that whatever I say today is not at all the I suppose opinion of the Institute for Public Affairs. So I don't want any sort of association there. So maybe we'll write a thing in that says that. I forgot about that. But yes, I do work there. And so the IPA is Australia's oldest think tank, and it's a centre-right think tank. And I suppose I always knew about it. I have a lot of friends that work in politics and stuff like that. It was academe around the time of the plague or COVID, and I was just sort of at this point I was tutoring dissident students as I call them at one colleges at John and writing for the Spectator and so on. And a friend of mine said, the IPA are looking for you'd be good. They'll be okay. It's telling.
Yeah.
Sorry, there we go. Yeah, so basically, yeah, there's sort of like, future politicians, economic people, law people. So yeah, this friend of mine said, you're sort of, the right person to do the Western Civ stuff, the culture war stuff. And so I went down to Melbourne, initially just for 3 months, and I liked it there. Loved the people, loved working there, so I stayed. Yeah, so that's sort of my connection. I think it's a small world in Australia, on in conservative circles. So yeah,
That's it. Yeah. I actually heard of the Center for Independent Studies too, which is another.
that's the second one. Yeah, and so they're a bit more libertarian, and more economics focused. So that's in Sydney. So they're really the Sydney base. Well, they're not. They have nothing to do with the IPA, although sometimes we do stuff together. But there's Sydney people, and then yeah, Melbourne is IPA.
How did you develop your politics?
Develop. I'm not sure. I mean, if you ask me when did I start to become politically active, that is maybe the same question. So I don't know, politics was always kicking around when I was growing up. My father and I would argue about politics, we talk about politics a lot. I think, I did philosophy at university. So I did an arts degree and philosophy was my major and I did honors in it. So I'm really a philosopher, but I did take politics courses at university as well. And literature. I chose literature as my minor, and then I went on to start a PhD in 17th century English literature. So, but I did political thought. So I suppose I started to approach the questions of politics by reading philosophy and reading really political thinkers. And then I went into the literature world. So I was in the 17th century, But I think because of all this woke stuff, there's no free speech on campus. Things are canceled in academia. Recognized me, and in fact, like I've met a couple of people at in the think tank world who I know from way back. Patrick Gray is one guy. He's a professor, a Shakespeare professor. And I met him years ago at a conference at Durham University on like 16th, 17th century stuff, really tight knit. Like, he's one of the best Shakespeare scholars in the world. And then I ran into him a few months ago. He's now the Dean of Arts at the University of Austin in Texas. So this new thing. And I had lunch with him and I was like, Patrick, fancy seeing you here. How did you get into this world? And I mean, it's the same as me. He was head of department at Durham and they had, money and stuff, but it was sort of like, you need to do black studies, you need a quota, and all of, this stuff. And so he left. And although he's still in academia, of course, he's doing sort of, I mean, more political work than he would have thought he would do. So I think a lot of scholars just want to do their work and they've been stopped.
Uh, can you hear me okay?
Sorry?
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I thought I lost you there. But yeah, I got it. So why the 17th century?
Well, I was really interested more in the 16th century a little bit. Michel de Montaigne, so the French writer, invented the essay, or he used the normal French word, plain French word that means, trying, a weighing, a judging, an attempt to describe what he was doing. Um, and so I was interested in the way that the essay developed in later in England. So the reception of Montaigne in England, which is the 17th century. And also, I mean, this is a fascinating time in England as well, with the Civil War, of course. So yeah. And I suppose I argued that a number of writers, so Francis Bacon is who comes to mind as the essayist of that period, but a number of other writers like Abraham Cowley, who was a very famous poet, he also wrote essays. And so you see this, and I think that they chose to take up the essay form in order to articulate doubt. So it was sort of a skeptical form. And if you read Montaigne, these essays are completely unlike an essay that you would write at university today. That they're not structured. So yeah, I argued that it was a skeptical genre, and of course that's a skepticism against religious enthusiasm. But it was also, very closely linked with the new science, and that sort of scientific, I suppose, weighing and judging. So yeah, that was sort of very, very generally what I was looking at.
Yeah. So, what brought you to Budapest and the Danube Institute?
Well, I was in Europe last summer. I was in Germany and I have family there. And I visited Budapest, and I thought it was very cool. And I met some people that were linked with the Danube Institute, and went back to Melbourne. And Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia, he's a colleague of mine at the IPA. And he's also a fellow at the Danube Institute. They adore Tony in Hungary. And so, yeah, I thought, well, I want to do the gig that he's sort of doing for a short time. And so I organized that to come over and do 3 months here. It was really more like 4 months. And then my boss called me and said, "Oh, when are you coming back to Melbourne?" About 4 months in. And I said, "Oh, I have a German passport. So can I stay?" And I've made every Zoom. And he said, "Yeah, this is fine." So I'm here still, yes. But I'm completely at home in Europe, so
Mhm.
yeah.
So, you wouldn't prefer to go back to Melbourne at any point soon, huh?
No, no, not Melbourne. No, no. I mean, Australia is a good place. It's a lovely place, but it's too far away. And for what I'm interested in at the moment, what I'm doing, Europe is the place to be, I think.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I was first introduced to you during a lecture you did at the Danube Institute grounds. It was on the topic of women in conservative politics. So I understand that this is an ongoing project of yours. So would you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, so basically I'd written pieces on like Marine Le Pen, Maloney, and sort of women like that. And I sort of noticed that there was a number of conservative women, sort of taking up quite serious positions of power across Europe. And then, the president of Hungary at the time was Catalin Novak. And the other interesting figure was Judith Varga, who was basically at the beginning of this year positioned to take Fidesz into the EU parliamentary elections and the elections here. So came to Hungary. So I thought, oh, that's great. I'll do a sort of like project on this. And I was also interested in the second question, which is what can the Anglosphere learn from Europe? Because as we saw, the Tories completely, well, they had lost the plot for some time, but they lost the election big time. So there was this problem in the Anglosphere of this problem of being unable to form a coherent conservative sort of front. So they seem to be maybe doing it in Europe, and it seemed to be women that were doing it. I also think that the center of politics in the Anglosphere and in Europe has been hollowed out for some time now. And so that's when you get this populist sort of thing happening. And you usually get strong men emerge when the center's hollowed out. And I mean, Trump's an example of that. Even Boris Johnson, to an extent, was an example of that. But these women, like, potentially Maloney, I thought at the time, are they strong women? I mean, what are they doing? And no one seemed to look at the way that, they play it. Because you can play the mother, you can play a sort of Thatcher type, it's interesting. There didn't seem to be much on it. So that was how it started. And then I was lined up to interview President Novak and also potentially Judith Varga. And then, of course, they both had to resign. So, I mean, in terms of Hungary, there's not much. I haven't thought about that since the resignations. But one other woman that I wrote about when she was elected the second time is Isabel Ayuso, who's the president of Madrid. And so this means she's sort of like the mayor, but it's much more than a mayor. She's running the show. And she's now in her second term, so she was elected again. But when she was first elected, and so she's in the PP, which is like the center right in Spain. So at the moment, Sanchez is running the country, and he's the left. He's very, very far left. So she's the PP woman, and she won. And then about 6 months later, the plague hit, and she just refused to lock Madrid down. She just said, not doing it. And so she's really economically liberal. So pro-market, but quite socially conservative. So she was, sort of like all the woke stuff's nonsense, but she was really good on the economy. And she was a hero, a saint, in fact. They called her Saint Isabel for all the bars and all the small businesses. So they had like apparently her picture behind the bar, her face, this really cool image. And you could order, meals named after her, and she was just a real phenomenon. They loved her. And the economy did super. So Madrid overtook like Catalonia, so like Barcelona as really the powerhouse of Spain, and then she was elected again. So I was in Madrid last summer, and I was talking to some writers and Vox, which is the populist party there, and it was right. I was there right in the lead up to the election, and Sanchez called a snap election, which was very, very smart. But if he hadn't called the snap election, the election would have been later in the year. And I think that the PP would have seriously considered putting Isabel Ayuso forward. But it was a snap election, so yep, and Sanchez won. So anyway, when I was there, I really felt like this is a city maybe I could live in, So it was summer, it was holidays, but it really felt like, stuff was happening. And so yes, I did. She always had sort of Sanchez on her mind. So when she was, campaigning in Madrid, it was never, she never mentioned the other guy, whoever he was, going for president of Madrid in the left. It was always Sanchez. So she was, yeah. So I don't know what's happening with her now, but I think that she's someone to watch, definitely. So there are other women out there, and I think that Maloney has completely she's soft, I think. I don't think she's handled herself very well at all on the world stage. So I don't know if she's a strong woman. And Le Pen seems to have lost it. I think a bit. So France, like the government will fall tomorrow. I was just looking at that. And I don't know if she's pushing Macron. Macron's in like Saudi Arabia or something, but is she pushing him big time? So what he calls, an election, a presidential election, because this, he can do that. I don't know why he would, but they can't have a parliamentary election again until July. So it has to be 1 year. So, I mean, what will happen is Macron's going to have to appoint someone. Again, he won't appoint Barnier again, even though technically he can. He just won't do that. So they'll appoint another technocrat, or he could resign. So I don't know what Le Pen's game is here, frankly. And I don't know if she'll go to prison. There is that. And she's old. But I mean, if she really wants to be president, I mean, maybe I don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, so I wrote a bit about that last month. And I said that this would happen and that Germany as well. So Europe is not in a good way at the moment. but yeah, that was sort of what I was thinking with the Woman Project. So I should go back and revisit Iozu, and also have a look at what's going on in Spain. I think Sanchez is blowing all the money. Probably that, is Madrid's money, really. But yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned the Anglosphere, which is also a concept that I subscribe to. I take it as the five major English-speaking countries, UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So why is it, especially in the UK and Australia, the Conservative Party seems to be failing or losing to the Labours?
Well, in the UK, the Tories were in power for so long, right? So I think that was I think that the Tories, I mean, was it just I mean they did so badly, but I mean I think that we can't forget that they were in power for a really long time. So that when that happens, people want change. Australia, we've had quite a mix. Over the past 20 years. But we have an election coming up soon. So maybe in May, but it looks like it might be sooner. And Albo is not looking good at all. So I hope that Dutton wins that. So the Libs should be back in business in Australia. Australia, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of, it's very different to the UK, I think. It doesn't sort of have the same problem. And if I'm looking at Australia, I suppose, as from an international perspective, there's not that much difference between Labour and Liberal, in a way that I think that there is in the UK, particularly with Starmer in charge. So one example is like in Australia, everyone sort of agrees that China is a problem. And no one is really crazy about international students. And so, I mean, most of them are Chinese. Increasingly, they're Indian. So they're two separate issues. But I mean, Labour put a cap on the amount of international students that we can have because higher education in Australia, it's like Australia's third largest export. The first two being stuff that we dig out of the ground. So this is a big problem. We have a big housing crisis as well, and a cost of living is the other really big thing. So there's not so much of a divide. It's sort of, maybe like the UK 15 years ago or something. Yeah. I don't know. I think the UK is completely finished. I don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years. And I don't know how Starmer's going to go. On the world stage. He's got Trump now, and Europe, has really shifted to the right, big time. So he's sort of a bit of a lone wolf, and Schultz will be gone, so he won't have a pal in him. I saw that he visited Starmer not long ago. So I don't know. The UK, I mean, their debt is horrible. I think that they're in a bad way. Yeah, but I'm not sure. The Tories just had no plan. So I don't know. I don't know enough about UK politics, I suppose. In Australia, I'm hopeful. Yeah.
Okay. So having been in Hungary, in Budapest for some years now, what do you suppose are some of the misconceptions that the English language media has about the current government?
Well, I haven't been here some years. But I've been here for most of this year. Um,
That's long enough then.
yeah, well, I'm a local. Okay, well, I don't know. I don't really read like The Guardian or whatever, but I've heard that they call Orban a fascist, right? Or they sink their teeth into when he was at that Transylvanian festival a few years ago and said Hungary is a liberal. I think there's a number of things. I notice this a lot with the Anglophone press on Europe, so on Germany, on France, because I read the French and German newspapers. But these journalists clearly don't. So a lot is lost in translation or concepts. So what Orban means by liberal is basically like woke. So it's not a classical liberal understanding, right? So he's not against classical liberalism like John Stuart Mill. It means a sort of woke mumbo jumbo. So I mean, liberal is, and Americans use liberal in the same way to mean. So, but to an English or definitely to an Australian audience, liberal means something good. It means the Enlightenment. So I don't know if there's a problem there, but I suspect that they just don't like Orban, and yeah, they think he's in cahoots with Putin or something. Is that what you were sort of getting at? Like, is that what you see in the Anglo sphere press.
more or less. Yes. Yeah, I think I sent you that one article that I wrote on March 15th. I said that yeah, both the liberal commentators and the conservative commentators have ideas about the current government that is far from reality. The liberals think that this is a, I guess, fascist dystopia that is against gay people and whatnot, and the conservatives think that in Budapest we find all the answers to the ailing problems of the English-speaking West, which it isn't. This is this is far from a perfect country. Budapest is far from a perfect city, but there are certain things I can appreciate about Old Vic or Orban, as I like to call him. I think he's striving to make this city, Budapest, to be a hub for international conservatism. Well, so far, that means conservatives from the English-speaking world and larger Western Europe to gather here and to bounce ideas off of each other. Which, as a conservative from neither the English-speaking world nor Europe, I find it to be quite appreciative. Always looked
I
what
mean,
I'm from.
absolutely. No, it's absolutely it's a safe space, for conservative. And that's really important. I think. I mean, I was in Italy recently and I was talking to some friends there and they said, what Orban has built is so impressive. I mean, there is nothing like that in Western Europe. And, they could do it in Italy, but nobody is really bothered. So the fact that he's done it is incredibly impressive. And I wonder what will happen when he goes. So he has to go at some point. Because it's really a one-man show, a lot of this. So that's something to think about. But yeah, I think you make a good point. I mean, obviously it's not a fascist place at all. But I like your point about the the conservatives thinking it's some sort of like Hollywood. I find that sort of very irritating. One thing is, I mean, it's Americans mostly. They come over here, and of course, Hungary is open to China. And they're sort of pro that when they're here, but then they go back to America and they're all anti-China. So I don't know what that game is. But I think it's an important place. And I think, yeah, because you can say whatever you want in Hungary, right? Like, I feel like living in Budapest is like living in Australia when I was growing up, like the 90s. So it's incredibly safe. It's the safest city I've ever lived in. But also, there's no woke. And there's real debate. I think that's really important. Yeah. So you mentioned the conservatives thinking that Hungary has the answer to all the sorry, Hungary can solve their problems or something. What was that?
Yeah, in a sense that yeah, you're right about these yeah, American conservatives. They come to Hungary and it's like they found Shangri-La or paradise. Orban has the answers to whatever is ailing what they think is ailing the U.S. at this point. So cultural war stuff or what's going on in academia and the media and et cetera, et cetera. Of course, Orban has been accused of suppressing certain media outlets as well as actually, expelling a school, a university from Hungarian grounds, Central European University, founded by George Soros. So maybe they find that to be an effective solution, but I don't.
Well, this is the thing. A lot of the Americans love banning stuff, and they love a culture war. They love war, of all sorts. You know, no, well, think about the first culture war, in the 90s. That was in America, and that was like, oh, nuts. I was writing something about it. Yeah. So I mean, it's because they're in the same way they go mad about, abortion and all of these sorts of stuff. They're very enthusiastic. So they do love a good culture war, and a lot of them will be fine with banning books and stuff like that, and really clamping down on things. They think it's sort of fair game, like all is fair in love and war. So but there is, I mean, one thing is that Orban has done well on the culture war sort of front here. I mean, there's just there, and it's I suppose I do want to hear more about the media because I do think is there free press here? Like, is the Hungarian media really free?
that's something that I should look into as well because again, because of my limited command of Hungarian, I cannot read Hungarian media, so therefore, it is all in the dark to me. And what I know is from what the English language press have told me, and apparently they said that he's been accused of suppressing certain news outlets that are critical of him.
Well, probably. But you could argue that, I mean, the BBC and CNN, I mean, BBC because it's obviously taxpayer funded, and the ABC in Australia, which is the same. They're supposed to be, they're not supposed to be biased, right? And they are incredibly biased. So, are we in the post-truth world anyway? I mean, does it really matter?
Yeah.
And how are people getting their information anyway in Hungary? Because is he just ta like targeting TV adverts? I know that there's often a lot of posters, quite hilarious posters. I remember there was one of von der Leyen, looking really evil. Um, is that propaganda? I'm not sure, but I would say there's probably it's probably a bit different to Australia, places like Australia. But this is the other thing. Orban's been in power for so long. Because so is it really him doing this, or is this sort of, when someone's in power for so long, sometimes the political party and the state start to become a little bit indistinguishable. So then yeah, the question, is it a democracy? I think that they're legitimate question. But to then jump from that to call it a sort of a fascist place, or Orban is a fascist, is ridiculous. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I don't see everyday Hungarians as particularly bothered by any of this.
yeah,
And
yeah, but
also, sorry.
they're critical of Orban on other issues, declining cost of living, homelessness, et cetera. So very commonsensical stuff. But yeah, they're right to be critical of him about that because the Hungary's currency has been losing its value, and yeah, there is a lot of poverty and declining standards of living all across the board.
Yeah, well, I think that their healthcare is like really cooked. I've heard horror stories from Hungarians about that. And then Orban's fireworks on I think like St. Istvan's Day. How much these fireworks were like tens of millions of euro for the fireworks show. And someone said, but he can't put air conditioning in the hospitals. I think it's really a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in this case both the liberal so-called and the conservative so-called, they see what they want to see in the prime minister.
Mm.
Yeah. But back to your original project. I think we can look at America and to what extent did the women vote for Donald Trump change from 2016 to 2024, which is this year. So, I wonder if you've looked at the data for that, and if so, how do you explain the fact that Trump does win among women, compared to an actual woman, Kamala Harris?
Well, do you have the numbers?
Not with me currently.
But he won the women vote, right?
I think that's what I've heard. Yes,
Yeah.
at
I
least
mean, well,
women without
this
college degree and with college degree, not. So there's a degree gap.
yeah. Well, he certainly did far better on the women vote than was predicted. So what was predicted was that particularly with young women, they would go for Harris, and young men for Trump. So this is this sort of gender divide that we're still seeing, which is a problem. I mean, I think that Harris just looked so ridiculous. I think she was just so bad that women chose Trump. I mean, what were the left saying? What was the problem with Trump? Was this grab it by the pussy thing, that he's a sort of misogynist? Was that why women wouldn't vote for them? I mean, I think if you look at women as voting only on, oh, of course it was abortion. This was the big thing. That was really Harris's big thing, was the abortion. Well, Trump on abortion, Trump is pretty chill on it. He doesn't really care, I don't think. So I think he wants to leave it up to the states. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I think, I mean, he seems pretty honest on abortion, which is that he's not bothered. And so I think that women women were clearly not thinking about abortion when they voted, or if they were, they thought, okay, well, Trump is not really going to get rid of it if they were pro abortions. I think they were probably thinking when they were voting, like these Hungarians that we just talked about, like people in Australia, about, things like the cost of living, and petrol and whatever. And Harris consistently said that she would make the same decisions as Biden did or something. So that just means that, oh, we're going to get 4 more years of this, of bread being this much, milk being this much. So I think, and Trump can make a deal, he knows how to make a deal. It seems like he'll fix it all. And I think that that's the way that they voted. So I think that your commentator, especially your sort of left wing one, really just they see the world through this lens that's like issues. And I think for those journalists as well, they'll take a controversial issue or a big issue like abortion, and then look at the how people will vote that way. But it's backwards. You start with the individual, I think. So what's important to people? Well, putting food on the table is more important than these luxury ideas. So I think it is, yeah, the luxury sort of commentator class, thinking in luxury ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. The way I see it, conservative women have two reasons why not to vote left wing, so to speak. One is that if you're in the US, the abortion issue, even if you're pro-choice, you think that, well, this is not the only issue there is, but for the most part, the Women for Harris vote seems to make it the only, if not the most important issue ever, and disregarding every other issue. And also, the Harris campaign is very extreme on the question of, to what extent do we allow, the fetus to be aborted and whatnot. Trump is not like that at all. Secondly, is the trans stuff, and I think the Democratic Party, and I suppose the same with the maybe the Labour Party in England or the Labour Party in Australia, they are going all the way on it. They're treating it as if it's a civil rights problem, whereas people who have an iota of common sense would think that this is pure interest group politics, and this interest group politics has happened to take hold of the center left in ways that make it further to the left than can be allowed.
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking at women in Europe, the two big things were um, a female politician or spokesperson or someone prominent can be hard on migration and can say don't want to be wearing the burqa, and also look at the numbers, look at the number of sexual assaults committed by immigrants, look at where they're from, look at this, we don't want this. And they are far less likely to be called racist than a man saying this. So I thought that's great. And women should be, Western women, liberal women. Yeah, of course they don't want to be wearing the burqa. They don't want to be assaulted. So that's a big thing. I don't know about immigration in America, so not so sure there. But the second thing, as you rightly pointed out, is the trans issue. And so I think what's interesting in America is the pronouns seem to have dropped
Oh,
from yeah. And but I think that that's funny, but I think it's also telling. These allies, they don't really care about the trans people. It's a bit of a trend for them. And what was Harris's thing? Like she's a hot mess or something, or this brat summer. That's it.
yep, yep,
I
yep.
mean, this says it all. Like, what does that mean? It's like partying or something, but it's a trend sort of thing. And so for them, the trans thing, it's a fashion accessory, right? Because yeah, which is incredibly insulting to the very the tiny number of people that are really transgender. And also trans sexuals or hermaphrodites. So I feel, that's really awful. So I mean, I think the whole thing is quite offensive, actually. So yeah, I mean, in the UK, the big thing was Tavistock closing down, which was a good thing. So people talk about peak woke, but yeah, I think for a lot of women, for those liberal women, they were fine with being an ally, and they're fine with it sort of all happening until it affects them. Which for these people, it doesn't really affect them. So I don't know. I think why don't women who are not woke vote against that? I think again it comes down to that they're not thinking about that sort of stuff. They're not voting on these cultural issues that the only people discussing the culture war are the elite. So I think yeah, your average Joe is really thinking about the economy and the cost of living. So maybe it is up to the elite to fight the elite in the culture war, which is what is happening in America. Because the problem is that they run everything, and the problem is when they start sort of, when you have the lawyers that are woke, making changes, and so that's when it gets dangerous. But that, I think there's been a lot of sort of that's been an issue in the UK. I don't know what will happen with that, but yeah. I don't know. In America, things look positive, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the migration crisis to Europe and whatnot. And I don't know to what extent is it solved now, or people are just treating it as a reality now that, certain streets of Paris or Berlin or Brussels are occupied by, Syrians, and they are bringing their version of Islam into them, and our de-Christianized Europe is cannot stop it, so to speak, or cannot counter it, or we refuse to counter it. So we just accept that is being the case.
Yeah, I think migration is really an issue that is a cultural issue, but we are seeing this really have an effect on people's lives, big time, So their neighbors walking down the street, and safety. So this is big, and I think that this is why Europe is now I mean there's really no one in Europe, even on the left, we'll say center left, who wants to say that migrants are a good thing, So I mean, some say that we need the workers, and so they'll make that point. But I wrote a piece for Australia for the Australian audience recently, and it was a summary of the EU parliamentary elections that we had here in June. And migration was the biggest issue, big time. And I had to try to sort of explain to one of the editors that, when migration is brought up as a question, it's taken as a given that it's a problem. We're not even having this debate. Oh, should we have them or not? It's a problem, and now it's about how to solve it. So we have, what Denmark and Sweden have recently upped, or Denmark certainly has recently upped the amount that they're going to give to migrants to go home and never come back. It's something like 30,000 euro. So there's deportations happening. So I think this is all you can do now. In terms of Europe being de-Christianized or something, I think that's less of a problem, because I don't know what the numbers are. I'd be interested in finding the numbers on how many secular or Christians, European natives, for lack of a better term, are converting to Islam. I think it's just like more of the Islamists and also Muslims are coming, and they are breeding, and the native population isn't. So that's if we look in a few generations, then certainly there will be a sort of de-Christianization. But I don't think too many people are thinking that far ahead. I think that they are worried about their safety. In terms of the no-go areas, I don't know. Are people in France and Germany just moving? It's difficult. I mean, this is something that you don't see in Hungary. And so I think and Hungary is to be sort of very much applauded on their migration policy. I think that's a good thing. But it is a problem. What do? You deport them, I suppose. And Australia has a very, very strong policy on immigration, strong borders. It's helped, of course, geographically. But yeah, if someone commits a crime, you deport them. So yeah, I don't know. Do you think that Islam is a problem, the versus the Christianity? Or I suppose, do you think that Europe is still
Um,
Christian?
well, I suppose Islam is certainly a challenge to Christianity because it believes in the things that Christianity says is wrong. The most basic example is that they do not believe that Jesus died and rise from the dead.
Yeah.
He is just assumed by the Father or God or Allah, as they call him. Secondly, historically, there has been no real coexistence in a peaceful manner between the House of Islam and the rest of the world because they view their entire mission to Islamize the world.
Oh yeah, we're all infidels,
Yeah,
and yeah, they're on a crusade.
yeah,
And this being in Hungary as what the bulwark of Christianity or Christendom, really. Yeah, I mean, this is a worry. I mean, I apparently the Muslim Brotherhood is. I went to this talk, this French academic. She's really worked a lot on, I can't remember her name, but her a book that she wrote last year, I'll send it to you, was like the best-selling book in France, and it's on the Muslim Brotherhood, specifically in Europe. So Muslim Brotherhood in Europe, because it's all over the world. And the way that they recruit people, and they're very secretive, but they're really sort of behind everything. And they got in early, of course, in the early 90s, with the creation of the European Union. And the Muslim Brotherhood are the representatives of Islam, at that level. So, and they're on a mission, of course. Um,
yeah. And I think I know that for many of the evangelists of Islam or what you call Dawas, they don't have to convince you that Islam is true. They just have to convince you that Christianity is false. And and that's when
that's what
they
they
come
do.
in.
That's powerful. Yeah.
And I think de-Christianized Europe means a Europe that's much more susceptible to to the Crescent faith. And one another thing too is that I do know that the Dawa they don't have to tell you the whole truth about their faith. They just have to tell you what you want to hear about the faith.
Mm.
And once they get you in, then you learn the whole thing. But then you find out that much of what the entirety of Islam teaches may be disagreeable to you.
Mm. I mean, the guy who's really great on this is the novelist Michel Houellebecq.
Yeah. Submission. That's his
Yeah, of
book. Yeah.
course. Yeah, Submission. And then his most recent novel was recently translated into English, actually, years later, about 3 years late. But I mean, his position in Submission, at least, is a question for the West, or maybe him saying to the West, well, what are you offering people? Because Islam has something, it has a proposition. So he really thinks that the West is so finished, that it's so finished that Islam, even as odious as we may think it, looks more attractive. At least it's something. So and his characters, sort of like middle class. But if you're a sort of down and out young man, in particular, Islam is going to be attractive, far more attractive than Christianity. But I think that the West has brought this on itself, absolutely. And you're right that the West should know better. I mean, hasn't this been the case forever? So it's a sort of suicide, I think. So maybe if we want to sort of do something about it, I mean, Christianity has to put forward, make itself attractive, I suppose, or make itself heard. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
And I certainly hope, as a practicing Catholic, that there's a sort of revival amongst the lapsed believers, those who baptize but then either grow out the faith or do not practice at all, like do not go to church every week and whatnot. And with that increasing, Christian influence, there will be an actual viable alternative, and what I would argue the better alternative to, the faith of Allah.
yeah, I think that is good. I mean, I went to confession not long ago, actually, here in Budapest,
Mhm.
a Catholic, an English-speaking priest. But I think if you're going to just basically, it's a very secular. The West is very secular, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So what you want to look at is you don't want the sort of mad left in cahoots with the Islamists, because they often are. That's what you want to sort of stop. So if we can bring the left needs to sort of get sensible. So that's the worry when Islam is seen as, oh, they're the victims, they're the other. They lump everybody that's not white. And male and Christian, whoa, even worse. When that's the bad guy or the very bad thing, and anything else is other. I think that's the worry, really. So the left's association with Islam, because I mean, in the novel Submission, the way that the Islamists get to rule is that the left form a coalition with them to stop Le Pen getting power. So I mean, that's it's. I think that's the way to fight it. Yeah. I mean, ideally, everybody is converts, but I don't see that happening. I wonder if you do know about young people. Are they more likely to be religious now? Sorry?
No, I think
No,
that's a no for an answer.
really? I thought it might have changed. No, okay. Yeah, I think, yep, the left and the Islamists in cahoots. I think that's the biggest problem.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's because they both see the world in terms of the political and not the religion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a problem.
Yeah, I suppose this is where we can end. So the final note, what do you suppose it means to be a conservative in, well, since 2024 is almost over, 2025 maybe.
Well, for me, it means being skeptical, I think. And sort of really, really sort of thinking through common sense or making common sense the center. Because I think that we have a chance now with Trump to get back to reality, I think. I mean, I feel like yeah, keep it sane, I would say. And always skepticism. So I'm a sort of conservative following, I guess, Michael Oakeshott. So big on skepticism. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For me, at least, being conservative means being a well-rounded person. So that's simple as
A
that.
more personal thing, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's the kind of it means to develop oneself in a manner that is congenial to the world around you.
Well, that's a fantastic way to be. I mean, that's certainly what I think young people should be focused on because they're increasingly atomized. And we didn't get to talk about it, but this big divide between women, young women going really hard left and men going very hard right, and not speaking to each other at all. Because they're so, I suppose, militant, I mean, you should be able to have a conversation with someone with different political view, right? You should be able to even date them. But these are so, yeah, so and the internet, I mean, I have no idea. And these kids grew up during the plague, so I worry about that. So I think you'd have a lot to say to them that I think.
Hopefully, yeah, if they happen to be stumbling upon this show.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's been good talking to you, Lana Starkey. I certainly hope we have many other occasions
So
to meet.
what I should do before I go is see this black eye.
Yes.
Awful. Okay. I was at a dinner last night. Uh Brilliant dinner. I only had two Coke Zeros and I hit my head on the table when I yeah, so it looks terrible. I was a bit worried about this. So
Yeah, I don't think it's
highlights.
visible throughout the time that we're on video, so it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Good to talk.
Yeah, likewise.
Bye.